So one of the things that the dean didn't know about is we actually had a Zoom call yesterday, and we decided, in these kinds of situations, it's more interesting and organic for us to have a conversation. And so we're just going to dive right into the conversation. I, of course, have some questions, some of which have been crowdsourced from a couple of you who've registered for the event. But we're going to leave a lot of time, of course, at the end for questions from the audience as well. And let me say at the beginning, it's an honor to be sitting here with Father Benanti. It's also an honor to be here with so many people who are representing the university from different backgrounds, whether you're alumni or trustees or my ethics colleagues. It's great to be here with everyone. So thank you all for coming out on this afternoon. And the risk of having a philosopher and a moral theologian sitting in front of you is that there's going to be at least one sort of philosophically oriented question that's going to come up, but I promise that there'll be some questions that are more practical and business focused, because that's obviously the focal point of today's conversation. So I wanted to sort of start out with, I guess, the slightly more conceptual or philosophical question, which is, some of you may know that a theme in Father Benanti's work is that artificial intelligence needs to be more human-centered. This is a phrase you see used a lot in the discussions around ethics and artificial intelligence. The idea is that it needs to be designed and deployed in a way that is accountable to human interaction, human decision-making, and human judgment. And so my first query to you, Father Benanti, is, first of all, maybe talk us through what it means in general terms, what it means for a technology to be human-centered, if that's possible in a condensed way. And then thinking more concretely, is there an example or two of artificial intelligence, an application of artificial intelligence that you think does a particularly good job at fulfilling this human-centered requirement?
Yeah, first of all, thank you. It was a pleasure for me to be here with you. And, what does it mean to be human-centered? Actually, it's what we do from the early days when we was here on the planet. When we first developed a clap as an handle, as something that was conformed to be used by the human beings. Now, the problem is that shape of an handle changed from technology to technology. When we develop the electrical power, that kind of handle has to be compatible with the fragility of the human being. And now that we have a kind of machine that is simply able to surrogate also the decision, or is able to have some kind of action in a fraction of time that is too speedy for the human beings, we have to make it compatible to our understanding and ability to handle it. And that means a lot of things, and that brings us directly to the second element of your question. What does it mean or what is a positive example of a human-centered AI technology? Well, probably one of the most sensible topics in which we can look for this kind of solution, it will be healthcare. Because, in the healthcare, it's really clear that we have a clear value, that is human life, to keep us alive, and to cure someone. And so the kind of design that we can apply there is the same kind of design that you can find with a different degree of urgency and importance in a lot of different businesses. Well, imagine that you have a doctor. And in cancer, there are two branches of doctors. There are doctors that are doing research, and they are the cutting edge of research on that type of cancer. But to be the cutting edge, they never see any patients. They simply see some kind of, under the microscope, section of patients in which you have a kind of, expression of that sickness. The other side, you have the doctor that actually is in the practice, that actually is in clinic. Well, but this is a really complex area. in which every year there are more than 3,000 papers that simply propose you the last cutting-edge therapy for the last kind of cancer. If you are a clinic doctor, in which way you can be aware of the last paper that best fit to that kind of patient? And here is where AI is so dramatically. And a human-centered design is a kind of design that simply allows the doctor to be the better doctor. So a doctor that simply knows the best kind of option for the kind of patient that is in front of you. And so we have some kind of artificial intelligence that simply suggests to the doctor the last paper that best fit that kind of patient. They are not telling to the doctor what they have to do. They simply giving to him an horizon in which he can see, and in which he can also discuss with the patients different alternatives that otherwise could be impossible to know for the rightness or the volume of information that are simply arising from the research in cancer. And now we have all the elements of this human-centered AI. First of all, it's not a matter of good or bad technology, but it's a matter of design. In this kind of design, we have, let me say in a provocative way, we have a bias. And the bias is that the precious things is the decision-making process made by a human beings that in this case commit all his life to do the best for the patients. Third, we need something that simply allow him to leave the commitment that he has, giving him the best instruments to allow him to make the best decision-making process. There are some kind of backside element that give value to that kind of design. Because the doctor is someone that has a good paycheck. And so you can imagine that empowering the doctor means continue to have some kind of expense. Yes, of course, that is true. But you have also someone that takes the responsibility, that make a promise to another human beings to be with him during the curing process. And so allowing the doctor to be the best doctor that he or she could be is what we need to allow the profession to be livable in the next decades, in the next future, with some new other challenges. So, for example, all the fertility rate in the world is dropping down. It's not just a matter of Italy and Japan, we have the worst scenario, but also Africa. We move from 12, 13 child for couple to 7, 6. So we don't see it now, but the fertile rate is decreasing. That means that the only way to have this development of the world, the growth of economy, is allow people to be much more productive. And this kind of design is also a multiplier of productivity for human beings. This is just an example, but you can easily apply to a lot of different, for example, scenarios. I cannot resist. We are in Seattle, Boeing City. Pilot is that one that promised to me to have a controlled crash that is called landing. My background is in engineering. I know very well how you design the landing. You have to keep the vertical speed inside the limitation of the structural material of the airplane. So it's the same thing. We would like to have better pilot in the sense to have pilot that can make better and fastest choice with the most nourished data sets, with the most nourished data that can help them to do it in the best way that they can. Or we can move it on the finance. Usually we make decision on investment on a really narrowed horizon. In this moment, you can connect the dots. You can have a broader approach that is not simple and automatic. It's an informed. That's one example. What does it mean to have a human-centered design?
Well, curious in that example, I was also thinking about healthcare when I was writing the question, mostly because we just had a conference here at the university on the subject. Is the imperative for this kind of human-centeredness, is it safety concern? Is it a reliability concern? Is it a concern that we're not recognizing customers, clients, patients as humans? What's the underlying moral imperative driving the human-centeredness that you described?
And this is the point in which a philosopher is provoking a theologian, and we move to another level of discussion. The point is that I need to answer to this question a metaphorical example, if you allow me. Because there is a core question that as businessmen and business leaders we have to have. Is it ethics something that could add value to the process or not? Let's take this question straight at the center of our discussion. And to do that, I need a metaphor. Let's go to New York, Manhattan. Let's go to the Central Park. If Central Park is the metaphor of ethics, and you add in something like, for example, real estate, you could imagine that ethics is a no business zone. There is the park. There are no houses. Is that true? Well, first of all, Central Park was acquired by the municipality of New York in the 18th century for $5 million. And do you know what is the value of Central Park? Okay, it's really difficult to evaluate. The last estimation was 2005, and it has $15 trillion. Well, this is an easy answer to the core question, and is if ethics is not by design, then it will be too costly to be applied. Look at GDPR for US real estate company, and look all the compliance stuff that now are arising among AI. The second thing is, if you are in the real estate business, is it Tomato building, the one in which John Lennon has an apartment, the same value or something else that is in our kitchen? No, of course. So ethics is something that can produce value to the business. And this is the core question, the core answer to your question. So because ethics, when it's designed to be in this way human-centered, is a multiplier of value. It deserves, it's able to go and to be a layer that simply enhance also the quality of the business. In a way that with one of the keywords that we love to hear today, make it sustainable. Make it in a way that could be applied and grow in a direction that is not break everything and run with it.
So I just mentioned all these concerns sort of bound up together with human-centered design, reliability, safety. One of the things that maybe some people in the audience don't know is that in 2020, there was the Rome call for ethics in AI, which of course Father Benanti was one of the organizers and leaders of that initiative. If you're interested, it's romecall.org. And this was a partnership with Microsoft, IBM, and some other institutions. I read recently that Cisco is now joined as core partner earlier in 2024. It's an impressive effort to bring together different organizations and institutions to develop essentially core principles for how organizations and their use and application of AI can think about some of these issues related to human-centered design. And I'm kind of wondering, now that it's become quite common to talk about the Rome call as sort of a set of standards that a lot of companies are looking to think through how they deploy artificial intelligence in an ethical fashion. What do you attribute the success of that work with the Rome call to? Started in 2020, I know just as early as just as recently as this past summer, there's been other international efforts to strengthen it and to renew it. What do you attribute the success of the Rome call?
Well, I try to not do the Italian. That on the Monday start to talk about the victory of his own team on Sunday. Usually it's a fantasy. No. Well, first of all, it's a matter of design. Roll call is not something that you have to be compliant. It's not a checklist, yes or no, pass or fail, things like that. Roll call is something that we can define as a cultural issue. So the real success of roll call will be the day in which we will not need anymore a roll call, because that kind of principle will be part of the culture. And this is something that is collecting the most vital forces inside company, for example. Every time that I go in a company and I talk with the engineer, and they spend their life, they commit themselves to the company to develop something new. And they have the deep desire to be part of a better future, to be part of something that will leave a positive trace for tomorrow. And so it's also a commitment by the company inside their own code, because they feel the urgency of that kind of commitment to produce much more value to the process that they are doing. And then we move to another element of the role. And the element of the role call is that inside the pool of ethics, we don't pick all the ethical elements, but we choose some element that we can call principle. What does it mean? When you talk about ethics, you have, for example, values. And values is something that we recognize as a preferable choices when we make choices. But the problem of values is that everyone has his own values. My values are really different from probably yours. I decide to not get married. This is not a judgment on any woman that could be married by. Maybe the Lord save her, but this is another topic. But it's simple to say that my own values are different. And everyone has the right to have his own value. So if we focus the wrong call on values, probably we have a divide too. We have something that is not able to collect people. But values are really important in ethics. This is another thing. Then we have a second element. And the second elements are norms, ethical norms. For example, do not kill. Well, the norms are connected to value, and are connected to value also in a really historical framework. There is an old medieval example about it. If a missionary, a Catholic missionary, has to go in a really poor country, what is the first norm that he has to do? To preach the gospel, or to help people to not starve? If you take the value, if you are a believer, the gospel is the eternal life. Wow, it's the most important. But your life is not a secondary value. And can you imagine how many books they wrote on that kind of question? But the problem of norms is that it's situational and connected to some kind of situation. Try to think to speed limit. 30, it's because probably there are work on the street. The day in which we have not work on the street, you can go faster. So if we focus on colony AI ethics on norms, it will be a contingency, because the technology will evolve. Well, what we focus on? At that point comes the third element. And the third element are the principle. What is a principle? Well, a principle is a negotiated criteria in a society to fix something that we call conflict. A conflict is when you have in front of you two values, and you don't know what is the value that's the precedence to be followed. So, for example, a conflict that I lived this morning, egg breakfast or fruit breakfast. There are some kind of conflict that we don't perceive as a conflict because the value are low. It's my job to teach ethics. There are some other kind of conflict that we face so deeply that we cannot fix it. So there is someone that is coming in front of me, I cannot stop my car, but if I turn my wheel, there are two people. What I have to do? Wow. For what I pick, someone will die. And we cannot sleep for that. Well, we can fix a principle, and the principle is minimize the damages. You can be everywhere, you can have your own values, you can live yesterday, today, or tomorrow, but minimize the damages. Wow, it's really good. We have 6 principles, 5 plus 1, inside the room code. And this 5 principle looks like not all the principles that you can adopt, not all the ethics, not all the value, not all the norm, but a really universal matrix that in this moment is collecting the adhesion and the positive outlook of a lot of people. After the last event that happened 2 weeks ago in Hiroshima, in Japan, plus 18 religious leaders joined the making this kind of matrix of principle simple, the principle in which the majority of living beings on the planet could be identified on. So principles start to become an inclusive instrument. I don't know if we can call that success, but we can call probably this as a blueprint of humanity on challenges that technology is facing to us. So roll call alone is not the solution. This is why roll call is not alone. But it's like, the yeast in the flour that allow the process to grow. And be transparent on that. So for example, the principle that no one has to be left behind. We are not developing, for example, medical AI tools just for the healthy. No one has to be left behind. It's a principle that is really attractive, like reliability, like trustworthiness, and things like that. So I don't know if there is a recipe for the success, but there is an approach started in 2020 to try to describe this minimum set of humanity that every day much more in a so divided world is attractive for everyone. That's what happened. And we will see what will happen later. By the way, Seattle U is part of the game. Huh? They signed it.
Yeah. So some of these principles that Father Benanti are referring to are principles around accountability and transparency and safety and fairness in the ways that artificial intelligence is used, is designed and deployed. One of my, related questions then has to be, how do we think about it as leaders of different organizations? How do we think about taking those principles and the framework that those principles offer and, as it were, implementing them in how organizations actually function? Because it's an aspirational set of principles. And one of the concerns that, of course, a lot of us who teach business ethics always are concerned about is the extent to which we can rely on corporations to be the ones who can creatively and voluntarily put into practice these sort of mid-level norms that you're talking about. So one question I have generally is, how do you imagine that corporations are going to take these principles and effectively implement them? And is there any skepticism or doubt on your part about the extent to which principles like the Rome Call will actually be adopted by firms if they're not legally held accountable or coerced through external regulation?
So let's look at the elephant in the room. Is it roll call something that could become an ethical wash? Probably, if we just rely on ethics. But ethics is worldwide recognized as a soft law principle that require also hard law principle. And that brings me to another definition of ethics that I think is important to recall here to avoid misunderstanding on the ends of it. Lord Norton was a really important United Kingdom man. He was an engineer, and he lived during World War I, and he was really expert on chemicals when we discovered the explosive. And so it was really important to allow Britons to win the war. After the war, he switched job and he became a judge, one of the most well-known judges for his fairness. When he retires, he gave a farewell speech to men clubs like what they was used at that time. And during the speech, he gave one of the best definitions of ethics that I can recall. He said, ethics is what is enforceable by law. God. On sinking Titanic, when someone shouted, first women and kids, and they allowed first women and kids to go, that was ethics. This is why it's soft law. It's not the hard law, but it's the expression of a culture, of a country, of a company. So I think that nothing like cultural leadership was stressed out starting from the late 80s, 90s to the business ethics. Because organizational culture is what makes a company or a group much more efficient. Ethics go in that direction. It's the expression of that culture. I have a lot of examples. I work with a lot of companies, helping them to express their own ethical value and allowing them to do this sort of ethical triage. And I can tell you that the people that are used to work in that company simple multiply the commitment inside the company. Because they recognize themselves. They recognize this idea of not forcible by law, that is not a compliance. That is what they are looking for to justify their own identity inside that company. It's the first question that we are used to answer to. What do you do? I am a professor. I am a businessman. I am an engineer. I am a technician. Well, when you answer that, you put part of your identity in this. And so this idea of ethics that is like, is enforceable by law, that give value, but is really well aware that is a soft law principle, not an hard law principle, is the contribution that the Rome will give to the community. We come before any kind of sort of regulation, and we don't want to be a regulation. And the company that joined the Rome Pool, they have no compliance list. But the amount of work that they do on that show us that ethics is a companion. It's something that actually is already expressed inside the company. And now simple become explicit, become knowledge, become willed, become in some way desired.
So curious also to know, obviously the Rome Call involved cooperation with the Italian Ministry of Information. We now have coming online some pretty substantial legal changes that are going on in the European Union. How do you see the sort of slow, methodical progress in the area of regulation in light of the work that you're doing as a call for ethical leadership in organizations? Are those sort of complementary? Is there a way in which stakeholders that you work with support and help the regulatory process? 2 weeks, the story will be different as everything in AI changes really rapidly. But how do you see the regulatory side and the ethics side fitting together or supporting each other?
Well, one of the hot topics of this year was the AI Act of the European Union. And I think it's also one of the most misunderstood elements in the history of regulation. Do you know how many technologies are defined inside the AI Act? 0. There is no technological definition, so it's not a standard or regulatory option for one kind of technology, like, for example, LLM or things like that. Also, the definition of what an AI is, it's really vague and general, and they spent 6 months. It's simple to find that kind of definition. Why? Because AI Act is not on AI, it's on human rights. I would like to be really clear as an European, we was really wounded, and we wounded ourselves during World War II. In Europe happened some of the most dark page of human history. We killed systematically 6 million of people just for their faith and belief. After that, a huge voice shout, not more. Well, and the human beings and the human dignity arise as one of the pillars of our European coexistence. Well, AI Act is a declination that human-centered legislation of European. Probably you don't know that during the Nazi persecution in Europe, the average success rate of persecution was among 13% and 20%, 5% Jewish. Not in Holland. In Holland, that was a really moderate and open-minded country. They was able to persecute up to 75% Jewish. One of the questions is why? Well, like every historical fact, the answer is complex. But one of the elements is that the Holland at that time was the only country that has a centralized anagraphical register. And they apply to that source of information a technology, and they was able to sort immediately the people that they would like to catch. From that dark page, we know that using technology on human beings could be terrible. And this is the center of the AI Act. AI Act is simple describing which kind of use of technology on human beings we don't want. It's not on the technology, but for example, you cannot discriminate human beings with technology. You cannot force inner part of human being to be visible, for example, in the hiring process, allowing the machine to read the emotion of the human beings and things like that. You cannot simply use a camera to identify any single living beings on the street. Try to think to that. Usually identity, ID, is something that it's owned by us. When I go to the airport, I show my ID if I would like to fly. With a cam, who is the owner of my ID? With face detection. Is it myself or the owner of the camera? Well, these elements are the elements inside AI. And there is no industrial regulation. We need other regulation. But you have to understand that AI Act is the last song, that tragedy pages that happen in the continent. And the protection of the human being in the age of autonomous decision-making process is the attempt that was there. Is an element. Then we need all the standard, all the things, and it will be a long process. But I got the feeling that sometimes it was really, really misunderstood on the nature and on the scope.
Thank you. So we want to make sure we leave some time for questions from the audience, and so I'm going to give you all a prompt to think about your question. Maybe before we sort of begin that process, one final question I have concerns the fact that since you work with so many companies and have this broad experience across multiple continents, Jensen Huang, the CEO of NVIDIA, recently said that with the rise of AI and human resources and audit and the General Counsel's office and just about every single business function, that every industry is now part of the tech industry. Right? You can no longer sort of separate the tech industry from all of these other things that are utilizing AI to the depths that it is. And so one question that occurred to me was, well, how do we think about ethical responsibility among firms that have perhaps no technological expertise, but yet in deep ways are systematically applying and utilizing artificial intelligence in their day-to-day operations? Do you see those responsibilities as different from tech companies proper, or are they part of a continuum?
If you make a question to an ethicist, this is a teaching that I give on the first lecture to my student. The first answer is, it depends. My students know that when I make them a question, they answer, it depends. And then I arrive and say, depends on what. But this is another topic. Well, imagine that you have a coffee image, and you are using image recognition software to recognize if a coffee bean has a mold. This is my Italian bias. I confess. Well, if you allow the molded coffee bean to pass, then the flavor, well, so you can discard coffee beans. And we come to a really well-known element that is the efficiency. Much more will be efficient the image recognition software, less product you have to discard that is not deserved to be discarded. Probably the image system recognition software is less precise than a human being, but costs a fraction. At the end of the day, probably you waste 2% of your production. You take your Excel, make your calculation, and you decide. But if you use the same things to decide on human being life, so the real answer is it depends. The coffee bean production, I think, is that the company has no other duty than sustainability and cost saving at the end of the day. If you use that system to decide who deserves, for example, to be helped or not helped in a insurance system or healthcare system, well, it's transparency has another thing because it's connected to value. The value of a coffee beans is almost the same of the price. The value of a human beings is not like the price, because once we're dead, our body has a value of almost $25 in raw material. That is not the value of a human life. And so these elements tell us that the real new thing is that AI is not a special purpose thing, but is a general purpose thing. It's not used to do something, but it will change the way in which we do everything, like electrical power. And so we have to change the mentality. And one of the best things that we did when we developed electrical power, that is a general purpose technology, was to have some standard that give data sheets to the engineer to make the best solution. So if you would like to apply energy power to a pump system that will refrigerate a nuclear plant, the data sheets on the power plant will help to have a safe instruction. Now, the problem is that we still don't have the same things for AI, because AI solutions sometimes are trained on data set of which we have no data sheets. And this kind of black shadow do not allow this transparency in the process. This is one of the ethical principles, and we are back. And so I think that will help the business a lot when the company will start to have this sort of data sheets for data sets that make it transparent, the limitation and reliability of the solution for that kind of application. And because there is no other ways, because AI will be applied for everything, I think that the direction will be the direction of a standard in which you will apply something like that. Try to imagine to a nutrition fact on food. You give that, and then you will be able to say, I eat it, or I don't eat it. I can eat it, or I can't, and things like that. But we are still in the meantime, because as you said in your first question, it's a certain speedy. And, we have also to be a little bit indulgent on ourselves. The process is speedy, we have to adapt. We have a species that can adapt and survive from the desert up to the north. But we need some time to discover that we can shape ice cube to make a glue. And so it's the same things. We need to adapt to this new innovation. And this is the reason why university is so important. Because it's fueling this kind of adaptation process. Is in the university that you will find the element that make your business sustainable in the age of AI. And ethics is one of the key. and this is why I'm so happy to be here, to spend this month here, to foster this element, because it's like Central Park. It will give a unique value to this land, and to these people. I hope so.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
So in the time that we have left, I see my colleague Maria Tran is in the back with a microphone, and we'd like to open things up for any questions that are percolating in your heads.
There must be hundreds of AI applications and probably into the thousands of AI applications worldwide. In the future, do you ever foresee where two organizations may get together and merge their AIs together, and maybe a third institution would come along and merge a fourth institution, et cetera, and maybe someday, 50, 100 years from now, there's just one AI?
For sure, what we could have will be interoperability. That I don't know is the same things that you say, but if you look at the railway system, interoperability is the distance between the two tracks, and it allows different resources to produce different results. So I can have a train transport system, and with that train transport system, I can run on Pennsylvania Railways, and I can run on other railways company, and they could be conjuncted, and I can offer a service among the difference. To be back in Europe, this kind of interoperability broke at the border with the former communist country, because they are scared by an invasion. And so the distance of the rails in the former communist country is different than the distance of the rail in the West. But this is a limitation to the business. And so we don't have one train company, but interoperability is able to produce value and growth among different systems. I'm pretty sure that will be one of the stressing points, interoperability. I'm not sure, because we are playing also with patent and other things like that, how fast it will happen and how open it will be. Because, data is a precious element in this analogy. And then, at least, but not at last, everything that we are talking about comes with an energetic cost. It could be another variable in this discussion. If energetic cost could force company to work together to have much more cheap solution. But it's not the problem of today. So, one of my colleagues usually say that the best way to be joking in technology is to make provision on the future. So I don't do provision on the future, but I think I would like to make some element, to stress you some element in analogy with the past that could drive a solution in that direction or in that direction.
You talked a little bit early on about healthcare, in particular, with a healthcare institution. So, particularly interested in that. AI needs information to learn, right? It gets better the more it digests, the more it learns. How do you think about limiting that information? When you think about some of the private medical records, are there limits in your mind to how much the system can know about people and their treatments and their outcomes? How do we go about thinking about that as a healthcare profession? As we're trying to save people's lives, but are there limits to how we can use the data we have? And how do we sort of think about that as we move through this?
I found that the answer to your question is connected to where you live. In Europe, usually we have the state-owned healthcare system, and they are paid by taxpayer. And there is a movement that is every day taking much more consistency, and this is the idea to be not only taxpayer, but also data giver. So if I give my data to research and to the healthcare institution, then I get better healthcare because it will cost less. And that is going in a direction in which there is not so much opposition. One of the last things that I read that was really interesting is about the skyrocketing of car insurance in the United States. Why? Because all the cars now are connected. And they sold your data to the insurance company. And they know how much you love to be like a Ferrari Formula One driver. And that means last month you make 3 hard braking. You are a high risk. Give me the double. And this is the feeling that I have in a country like the United States, in which giving my data means skyrocketing my price. And that could be a constraint for that. Then we have another model like, for example, Africa, in which some kind of predatory approach could simply steal the data without giving them nothing. And that would be another, colonialist approach. So once again, it depends, is the best ethical answer. But I think that we can have a discussion to say which kind of models we would like to apply it for. And that is really an academical topic, because probably in the future, every patient will have a little fortune with itself that is the data that is connected to it. And then there is another topic connected to healthcare, that it's less much individual. Imagine to have identification of all the processes that happen in an hospital, not connected to the patients, but I can give AI to an hospital to produce much more efficient cure. So for example, in emergency room, I can tell with data that to the doctor that if they ask for a CAT scan now, in this moment of the day, they have to wait 28 minutes. And another kind of analysis, 12 minutes. And so they can optimize, because in the hospital it's like a living beings which you have control. And this is a control of complex system that could have other positive effect without touching the individual data and healthcare data.
So human beings developed AI. They continue to evolve AI. And now with machine learning, the evolution of AI has accelerated and will continue to accelerate at an unprecedented stage. Today, like AI, as you mentioned, is general purpose, ubiquitous, and we are more and more dependent on AI today for our day-to-day activities. Where do you actually see, what role do you see of humans versus AI in the next 25 years, or 50 years, or 100 years?
There is a constraint, and the constraint is computational power. The computer system that are giving answer with GPT now, it's almost at the limit of power, and just a little fraction of humanity is using it. So there is a huge pushing in teeny models to allow the teeny models to run on local computational power. I don't know, but I'm thinking to critical mission, like for example, an airplane. If I should project the next airplane, I don't want to rely on connection to have an answer from an AI. It has to be on-prem, because the day in which you are not connected, because everything could happen, you don't have the function, and that could be a failure of the system. And so, probably we will see some of that new element that will reduce the computational power. And that will be the roll dice that could change all the horizon to your question. Because the day in which we will have these teeny models that are good enough to run on-prem and to give you some kind of answer, then the same design of things will change forever. I was at the presentation of the first iPhone. And what I remember from Steve Jobs, he was really brilliant, is that the first 5 minutes of his presentation was about the genius design of the competitor. I started thinking, why you are talking so good of Motorola, of BlackBerry, of Nokia? At one point he stopped and said, now you know what? Motorola has this genius element, yeah? but they are fixed. This key just do this function. What if we make another design approach in which the surface adapts to the use? Well, that could be, metaphorically speaking, the innovation of AI. So the object will not anymore be shaped for something, but it will adapt, it will assist, it will empower us. And that could be a revolution. It's really hard to foresee now. But when it will happen, and it will be possible, and computation will be everywhere, we will see a new kind of artifact. And that will be a new thing for human beings. We are not just the only species that make tools. You can see a lot of monkeys that use a stone like an amber. We are the only species that make so many tools, and tool to make tool. Tomorrow, we could have a tool that become a tool for us without we thinking about it. And that will be a challenge also in the way in which I'm sorry if I'm complexing your topic, but your question was really good. And so the idea of foreseeing change, I think it's one of the topics that is the realm of academia, and is also what allowed business to be in business. Because if you foresee the changing, that you can get right to change. And so AI will be challenging that directions.
Final question, tease us for the future. We are at time, unfortunately, and I know, of course, there's dozens of other things that we could possibly talk about.
May I comment just with a sentence? Relativity was a discovery only because Einstein was German. If he was Italian, they're not discovered.
I want to thank everyone, of course, for coming again, and of course, thank Father Benanti for taking time out. I was joking with him at the beginning that we're really putting him to work, so to speak, while he's here for this month at the university. I'm really grateful for the time that you've spent with us today. Please join me in thanking him.